This is Gemara Basra Daf Yud Beis, and we pick it up in the bottom of Yud Aleph Amid Beis. We are 5 lines from the bottom, quoting a brisa that we had in the previous daf, a brisa that we didn't really explain adequately because we're going to explain it here. Amar Mar, and we just ran out of time. I should have explained it there. It's not an excuse. Amar Mar, Hayasasam. If an entrance to a mavoi one closed up and he subsequently wants to reopen it, Ein b'nei mavoi makvin alav, the people in the mavoi cannot prevent him. And again, to remind ourselves of what's going on over here, the way the times of Chazal is they had multiple houses open into one shared chutzner. 2-3 houses share, let's call it one front yard. And then that front yard has an opening into a mavoi, which is more of the street. So the question is, there's a person at two sides, he had two entrances to two different mavlis. Let's use a simple example so our brains could handle it. One could have a house with a front yard and a backyard. Let's say the front yard's open into one street and the backyard is open into another street. So that backyard entrance into the other street, one day he decides he doesn't want that entrance, he closes it up. And then subsequently decides, why did I close it up? That's a beautiful entrance, he wants to reopen it. And of course, using a street is not a perfect example because we're talking about a mavoi, which the bailos, the ownership, the rights to that mavoi is defined by the people in the mavoi. So therefore, the question is, can the people in that mavui, after I closed up my entrance, can they say, what are you doing? We don't want you to have another entrance. And of course, every person, every entrance, more people, they don't want it. So said the Gemara, if he closed it up and he wants to reopen it, they're not able to prevent him. Why? Because he has rights into that mavui, because his house, Betzim, does open into it. So Amai Rava, 3 lines from the bottom, Loishanu, we only learned Al Shloparetz at Spesimav, only if you didn't remove the door frame. Aval Paretz at Spesimav, but if Imamish removed the door frame, he totally destroyed his opening into that Mavoi, then B'nei Mavoi Ma'akvin Alav, they could indeed prevent him from having an entrance into that Mavoi. Amar le Abaye leRava Tanya de Mesayilach. Says Abaye to Rava, I have a brisa that proves precisely that which you're saying. As we turn over to today's Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, says the brisa, Bayis Sasam, a house whose entrance was closed off, Yesh Loi Dalid Amos, still has a Dalid Amos in front of the courtyard, as if there still is an entrance. But parts at Besimov, Ein Eloi Dalid Amos, precisely like Rava said. Continues the brisa after the parentheses, Bayis Sasum, a house that has a dead body inside, but its entrance is sealed. And of course, that's where this, we'll call it a random halacha, but sidebar halacha comes in because it's the same Bayis Sasum. It's a closed off entrance to a house. Eina mitame kol tzvivav, does not make tameh anyone who enters the house, as the toma is contained within the house. Paretz as Besimav, but if he tore down the door frame and sealed the door permanently, then, very interesting halacha, mitame kol tzvivav, then the tuma does go outside. Interesting tumatik halacha. If you look at Rashi, Rashi explains, Eina mitame svivav el keneged ha-pesach emeis b'toichai. Whereas parts that's besimav, 3 lines on the top, Reu ki kever. V'chachamim aimrim meis svivav v'kever dalaramas kedesh liyikravu oisei taharois adai kervi alu v'lav adaite. It's a din d'Rabbanan that Chazal created that surrounding a kever, there's tuma that's given off up until Dalit Amos, because they want those who deal with taharois, to stay a distance from a kever. So if there's a door, then the halacha is only directly opposite the door is there going to be tuma. But if you completely seal off the door, then the halacha is it's like a kever, and there'll be dalid amos of tuma surrounding the entire area, and that's Abaye's proof to the din of Rava. Continues the Gemara on a similar vein, discussing how Ruvain could block Shimon from doing something, etc. 5 lines from the top, Yud Beis Amud Aleph, Amar Rabba Rachana Amar Rav Yechon. Mevuais hamefulashais liir acheres. We have a mavoi, a three-walled cul-de-sac, or in this situation, it's a mafulash, it's an open street that's open into another city. Ubigshu b'nei ha'ir l'saisman. And the people of that first city want to close it off so they can't use this street as a shortcut. The street cuts through from place A to place B. So place B decides, I don't want you guys having a shortcut into our city. They want to close it off. Those of the other city can prevent them because they already have a right to use this passageway. Therefore, you can't just one day decide to close off my right. When I have a right to do something, that's a halachic right. So if there's a street going from place A to place B, and place B decides one day, I don't want you guys inside. I can't just block off the street because place A has already established their chazaka, their rights to that area. Continues the Gemara, loy mi bai, creating this a drop of a larger chiddush. Says the Gemara, needless to say, meaning it's pashit. Excuse me, where the page is moving a little bit. It's pashit if what loy mi bai ki lakadarcha achrina. If there's no other way, then of course they can't prevent it. It's the only way to enter the city. Demakvi. They have another way. Still nami ma'akvi. Why? Misham Rav Yehuda Amarav Damar Misham Rav Yehuda Amarav Damar Matzar Shechziku Barabim Asar Lekalkaloi. Once you have a boundary that the public has established a rights to, you're not allowed to ruin it. And this is the reason, as we'll see many applications, those that make shortcuts through their backyards, etc., etc. There are many halachic implications. As we see over here, once it's an area that the public has assumed the rights to, you can't subsequently just close it off. Which would be the simple application if someone creates a shortcut through their backyard and one day decide, you know what, no, it's too much. You can't do that. Why can you not do that? Because there is the Rosh Hashanah already has established their right to use it. Continues the Gemara with a similar halacha. Amar Ravanan, 15 lines down. Amar Shmuel, first one line is Shabiru Bairai. Mevuais amufulash al Rosh Hashanah bikshu b'nei mevuais lamilem delasais. And now the people in the Mavui want to create a door. Why do they want a door? So those who are going on the main street can't just enter into their private Mavui. The people in Rosh Hashanah can prevent them from making these doors. Why? Because this is a side street that the public's going to want to use at times, and they already had a right there, so you can't just put up doors. So Savra Mine, they thought they thought this is only within Dalet Amais of the entranceway, like Rav Zera, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Zera, Amar Rav Nachman, Dalet Amais asmuchas Shram Kishus Rabin Tamya. So they thought that only within those Dalet Amos or Shazarabim, that's where it's an issue putting up those doors, because that area is considered part of the public space. But says Gemara, it's nothing to do with that. Sometimes there's a lot of traffic and they want to empty that area. And therefore, you're not allowed to put up doors to block it off. Says the Gemara, 2 dots, smack in the middle of Amud. Continuously quoting the part of the Mishnah that says, how do we divvy up a field? There has to be 9 kav to each person. Rav Yehuda argued, and he said you have to have 9 half kav to each person, then you could divide up the field. Says the Gemara, in reality, there's no machlekes tanikam and Rav Yehuda v'lo pligi mar ki Isrei umar ki Isrei. Says the Gemara, now let's understand what are the anhagas of different places. In Bavel, each partner has to receive an area that takes a full day to plow. My Beiradu Yaima, what is an area that takes a full day to plow? Zara. If it is referring to a day during the planting season, then Trey Yaima Karba Loyave. Then what? It will not take 2 full days to plow during the plowing season. So the Gemara says, which way do you go? And Yom Karba, Yom Dezara lo yahava. Meaning there's the plowing season and there's the planting season. So by the planting season, there's less to plow than by the plowing season. So how do we figure out the amount of a field that's a 1 day's plow for the people of Bavel? And that's when you could split up the fields. Says the Gemara, different ways of learning. I'll tell you, Yom Dekarba, Dekarif, Vitani. It means a place where they plow twice during the planting season. So both by the planting and by the plowing, they plow twice. Therefore, it's the same thing. Teretz number 1. And it's talking about a place which is Haduri, which has hills. And therefore, such a place also is equal during the plowing and the planting season, because you can't plow that much during the plowing season due to the hills that there are. Continues the Gemara, other types of dividing up areas. Davla, someone has an area of water, a water hole. Amar Rav Nachman, Beida'alu Yaima. Enough water to water the field and irrigate it for a day. Pardesa, a vineyard. Amar Avu Dishmuel, Pashle Shekabin, Tanami Hachi, Amar Lechavero Manas, Mana Bekerem, Ani Meicher Lach. I'm selling you a portion in a vineyard. This is Nevi'as. How do you know that? How do you know to figure out the minimum size of dividing the land? Says the Gemara Bebavel Mai, when it comes to the vineyard, Amar Rava Bar Kisna Telas Asiyota B'nei Teresar Gufni. 3 rows, each with 12 vines. Kechi Derapik Gavra B'Yayma, so that each person has enough to work on the vineyard for a full day. Again, a similar measurement that we said before, just it's catering it to the area of a vineyard. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Avdimi demin Chayfa, Miyem Shachar Beis Hamikdash Nidlan Nevuah Min Hanaviyim Nitna Lechachamim. And of course, we quote this because Rav Yossi said a moment ago in a different Nevi'as. So says the Gemara, Miyayim, that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there was no longer Nevi'im, but rather the Chachamim received the Nevuah. Atu Chacham Nav Naviyu. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? Are you telling me that before the Chorban, the Chachamim were not the Nevi'im? It sounds like before the Chorban, there was Nevi'im and Chachamim. Only Nevi'im had prophecy. And after the Chorban, now the Chachamim got Nevuah. But beforehand, the Chachamim did not. Says the Gemara, Hachi Kamer, Afal Pi, Shenila min Nevi'im, min Chachamim lo nitza. No, you're right. The Chachamim and Nevuah, the Nevi'im and Nevuah, Bizman Beis Hamikdash. With the Chorban, the Nevi'im lost their Nevuah, but the Chachamim still had it. Amar Amei Amar, v'Chacham Adav Minavi. Chacham is greater, Shenamar, v'Navi Levav Chachma, as the Pasuk says, and a Navi has a heart of wisdom. Mi nitla b'mi. What do you hang in what? In the world of comparisons, how do you create a comparison? Haviyomer kata nitla b'gadol. You hang, you depend, you equate the larger one with the greater one. So we're saying the Navi is like the Chacham. Amar Abaye Teda. I'll bring you a raya that the Chacham, they had Nevuah and they retained their Nevuah. The Amar Gavra Rabba Milsa Umit Amra Mishmei de Gavra Rabba Achrina. One great person says something and he says something from another great person, even though they had nothing to do with each other. Says the Gemara, what shaychus? Amar Rava, my kusha. What is the problem? Why are you saying that you need Nevuah to say something over one person in the name of the other? Maybe they're both of one mazel, and therefore they said the same thing, meaning the Gemara's raya was that two people could say the same thing even without actually hearing it from each other. So says the Gemara, it must be that there's some element of Nevuah, and therefore each one was able to be mechavein to say over without actually knowing from the other. But asks Rava, no, maybe they both were of the same mazel, and therefore it's just possible that two people can make the same statements without actually hearing it or having Nevuah one from the other. Elam Rava Teda, different raya. Tamar Gav Rabba Milsa Mitamra. A great Chacham could say something, a Gav Rabba Umitamra, and then the same thing will be quoted as we turn over to Yud Beis Amid Beis. Same thing will be quoted Mishmei to Rav Akiva Bar Yosef Kavosei. And even though the two had nothing to do with each other, now Rav Akiva, assumingly, was the greatest Chacham of his time. No one was like him, and therefore it must be that there was Nevu'ah. But I asked the Gemara, Rav Ashi, I don't understand what you're talking about. Omai kosha, del malaha milsa bar mazlu. Again, very good. The Rav Akiva was the greatest chacham. But how does that prove that no one else could have had the same mazel as him? What are you gaining by Rava? It's the same thing. Elam Rav Ashi, Teid, I'll tell you with the right that there's nevuah. Tamar Gav Rav Milsa Mitamra Halacha LeMoshe Misinai Kavosei. And the same thing will be quoted as the Halacha LeMoshe Misinai, and therefore it can't be that anyone learned it out from any psukim. It has to be via Messiah, but they didn't have the Messiah, so it must be it wasn't a nevuah. Says the Gemara of Damu Kisuma Baruba. Maybe it's like a blind man who has a skylight, meaning it just has sheer luck, so maybe it just happens to be that he said the same thing. Says the Gemara of Latam Yoiv, did he not give a tam? So if he gave a tam, there has to be some veracity to that which he's saying. Clearly proves the Gemara that there must be nevuah by the Chachamim. Bizmat la'achar churban beis hamikdash. Continues the Gemara 7 lines down. You beis mebeis amar Rav Yechlam yom shechara beis hamikdash nila nevuah min aviyam v'nita l'shaitim u'letinoikos. Says Rav Yechlan, a moment ago we said La'achar Chorban, there's no more nevuah by the Nevi'im, or rather it's given to the Chachamim. Says Rav Yechlan, it was given to Shaitim and to children. L'shaitim, mahi, what is that? Kadamar bar Vashi, davekoi beristika, demechuza. Mar bar Vashi is standing in the marketplace of Mechuza. Shami elahu shaita, he hears a certain shaita de Kamar. Reish mesifta de malach, b'masem mechasya, tevyumi. The head of the yeshiva Masim Echasya is now being appointed. Tav Yochasan, sign the name Daf Yomi. Amar Mar bar Vashi heard this and said, Man Chasam Daf Yomi b'Rabbanan. He said, who amongst the Rabbanan write their name Daf Yomi? I know, I'm Daf Yomi. So Shema Mina. So he said, you know, it must be L'didi Kamali Shaita. Must be it's time for me that I'm about to come Rosh Yeshiva again. Mar bar Vashi heard a shaita screaming that the Rosh Yeshiva in Masim Yechasya is being appointed by one who signs the name Tevyumi. Here's Mar bar Vashi says, wait, I signed my name Tevyumi. He didn't know anything, but he said, I hear this from a shaita. Must be time for me to become Rosh Yeshiva. Kamasli gets up. Ada'asei im the Rabbanu la'isvei. The Rav Achmed Divdi Bereisha. But by the time he comes, they already put Rav Achmed Difti as Rosh Yeshiva. But they didn't appoint, meaning they voted on Rav Achmed Difti, but they didn't incarnate him, they didn't appoint him as Rosh Yeshiva. But then, once they heard that Mar bar Vashi was coming, they sent a pair of Rabbanan to him. Meaning it sounds like they only voted on Rav Achmed Difti because there was no one else. But when they heard that Mar bar Vashi was coming, they decided, they sent Rabbanan with him and asked him, should they appoint Rav Acha? Akvei, Mar bar Vashi said no. Akvei, Mar bar Vashi held back the two messengers. So two messengers show up to Mar bar Vashi, asking him if they could appoint Rav Acha Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Achmed Difti, and those two messengers don't return. So other Shagazudi Rabbanan and Achrina, they send another two messengers. Akvei Gabei, Mar bar Vashi again holds them by him. Adimalu Asara. And they keep on sending more and more Rabbanan, wondering what's going on over here. Mar bar Vashi keeps unlocking the door and them holding them back until he has 10 people in his house. Keeping the Malu Asara, once Mar bar Vashi has 10 people, Pasachu V'tana V'darish. Mar bar Vashi began a shir, and he began darshaning to the 10 Chachamim. After these 10 Chachamim hear the incredible pearls of wisdom from Mar bar Vashi, the wonderful Torah, then they wanted to make him Rosh Yeshiva. You don't start a yeshir less than 10 people. So how does the story end? Kari Ravacha and Avshei Ravacha Medifti called about himself, called Amarir in Loi, Loi b'meira mativa in Loi. Anyone that dealt harshly will not soon have something good that happened, meaning he just lost his position as Rosh Hashiva. But anyone who gets something good quickly, will not quickly have something bad pointed upon him. So he says, eventually I'm going to become Rosh Hashiva, and he just waits. But from here the Gemara proves that there's an element of Nevuah by the Shaitim, as once Mar Bar Avashi heard that the Shaita said that the person who cited Yumi has become Rosh Hashiva. Mar Bar Avashi took that as a sign, and he created this whole long story till the Chachamim heard him give shir, and then Lamaisa, they appointed him Rosh Hashiva. Says the Gemara, Tinaikis Mai. What's the raya that Tinaikis have a prophecy? Kiha, says the Gemara, Maihi. Kiha de Basra of Chista, literally in the middle of the Amid, the first word line is of Chista, Havayasi bekanfe davua. She was sitting on her father's lap as a young child. Havayasi kamei Rava, Rami Bar Chama. Rava and Rami Bar Chama were sitting in front of Rav Chista. Amar La, Rav Chista said to his daughter in jest, Man menayu, which of these two bias? Which one of these two do you want? This is a little girl, and her father joked says, which one of these Rabbanim, Chachamim, Talmidim do you want to marry? Amar Le Tarvayu. She said both of them. Amar Rava, said Rava Vani Basra, and I want to be last. So Rav Chista's daughter made this joke, and actually came true. Rav Chista's daughter married Rami Bar Chama, and then he was nifter, and then she married Rava, proving that there's some element of nevuah to the tinaikais as well. Amar Rava Vana Basra, and I want to be last. Says the Gemara. This statement is going to appear a bit random in the segue of events, but it's because it's in the name of Rav Dimi. Amar Rav Avdimi Dimin Chaifa, who said something in Amar Aleph. Before one eats and drinks, he has two hearts, he's unsure. After you eat and drink, you have one leiv. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Ish navay leivav, Ksiv navay v'luchais, u'metargemina chalil luchin. First the pasuk says navav luchais, then it says halu luchais, and first it says one more time, Ish navav luchais, an empty man will have many hearts, yilavev, and then it says navav luchais, and we're targeting that halo out luchais. So you see, navav means empty. So what do we see? We see that before the person eats, he's unsure. But once he eats, he's conclusive. Amar Ravuna b'reidir of Yeshua aragol b'yayin afilu liboy atum kibesula yayin mikfak choy shenamar v'tirash yinovav besulais. Even a closed heart can be opened up by a glass of wine. We conclude today's share going back with how we started, which is dividing up fields. Amar Ravuna b'reidir of Yeshua, about 50 lines to the bottom. First word line is Huna, Pshita Chaluk Bekur. It's Pashit, that the Chilek Bachar, the Chilek Pashit, Yahavinan Le Achad Mitzra. When we have brothers dividing up an estate, we have the Bachar, the firstborn, we have the Pashit, we have the regular brother. We give him, we have the portion of the Bachar, the portion that the Bachar gets like everyone else. Yahavinan Le Achad Mitzra. So when the Bachar gets two portions, we give them side by side on one border. Yavam Mai. The question is, what is the status regarding the two portions that a Yavam gets? A Yavam that did Yibam gets an extra portion. So where do we also have this thing that he gets at Achan Mitzvah one border or not? Amar Abaye, it's the same thing. My time a Bachar Kari Rachmana, because he's called a Bachar. Rava Amar Kra, Vaya Bachar, have Yasai Kibechar. He should be like the Bachar. He doesn't get the same portion as the Bachar, and therefore the Yavam will not be able to demand two portions in the same area. And we conclude with the story, there was someone who bought land on the boundary of his father's property, Kika Palgu. When he and his brothers were dividing the father's estate, Amar Le, Poligili Amitzrai. Give me on the part that I bought. I own land in a certain boundary. I want land in that area. Amar Rava, and we forced the other brothers to give him Because why not? It's called Kaifin Amidas Snai, and we give him so he could have lands near the lands he has. Maskler Rav Yosef, asked Rav Yosef, Amri La'achi, says Rav Yosef, but the brothers can say, Marlin Lei, Aluyei, the field you want is good to us, Kinich Sei Devar Bar Merioin, as the property of Bar Mar Merioin, meaning, very good that you have another field near that area, but that piece of land is very chashiv to us. And therefore, you want it, no problem, but you have to compensate us because we feel that land is very, very valuable. It says the Gemara of Hilchos Rav Yosef, and that is deed v'halacha. Similarly, Trei Arasa, Trei Nigri, 2 pieces of land and 2 irrigational canals, can they demand them? And again, Masla Rav Yosef is in the high midville, high loy midville. Rav Yosef, again, they can say that one is more valuable, one the water is drawn, one is not from the canal, and therefore they're able to say it's true, you want the land, no problem, but we could demand compensation. And finally, Tarti Haralsa Achad Nagra. We have 2 pieces of land on 1 irrigational canal. They could say that no, we don't want to have he doesn't want to divide the land up so much because it won't be more arisim. He wants more protection on his field. Like Rav Yosef again, Fushi Arise Lam Vilsahi. Again, we paskin like Rav Yosef. So we see that as much as we're kaifin the brothers, Al Mida Sedaim, but in the same regard, if the other brothers say, yeah, but there's a particular reason why we want that field, then we say, okay, you have a good taina, and therefore if he wants the field on the border, on the canal, etc., he has to compensate you accordingly.